Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our continued coverage of World Cup 2021. We are down to the quarterfinals in the women's section. 8 players remaining and 16 remaining in the men's section. Magnus Carlsen, namely, taking on Andrei Yesipenko, who defeated him in the Tata Steel. Andrei, 18 years old, just recently hit 2,700 and has a lifetime 100% score against Magnus. Granted, it is 1 out of 1. Now, before we jump into the games, why is the video called what it's called? It's because if some of you remember, most of you remember, that video got 500,000 views actually. Hopefully most of you remember that we had a break-in in our home a couple of days ago, and over the past few days, we've had to make a couple of difficult life decisions. Namely, that 2 weeks after moving into this new apartment, we will be moving out of it. So over the next few days, we'll be packing our stuff, and we'll be settling in somewhere with more security. Many of you sent in advice to my email. Many of you, donated to cover the lost stuff. I appreciate each and every one of you. Some of you said something really stupid, like I voted for this kind of a New York City politically. That's just an idiotic thing to say. Politics should not be involved when a person's house gets broken into. But listen, I do jump into the comments sometimes, and I crowdsourced a lot of positivity. But yeah, some of you just, man, time and place. It's like, I feel like some of you would be talking about the stock market at a funeral or something. Anyway, we're going to jump into our coverage of World Cup. First, we're going to begin with Magnus Carlsen. I'm trying to remember if I wanted to say anything else. No, I think that's it. So the good news is that pretty soon we'll have a new spot and etc., etc. So Magnus begins with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and he plays a Catalan. This is not surprising. The Catalan is very good, but it is surprising that it's Magnus playing it. Now, Dubov plays this a lot, and I don't know if Magnus still has a relationship with Dubov in the sense that he works with him, but Dubov has basically played the Catalan the entire time. But it's interesting because Yesipenko just knocked out Dubov. So bishop b4 check is a way for black to induce the bishop to come here so that the bishop cannot go to b2, and then the knight can't come to d2. Bishop g2, castles, and this is just one of the ways that this position gets played. Here, generally, since black has sort of committed not to taking the pawn, generally won't take it because you could have taken it as early as this move. And black here plays knight d7, or the move c6 to try to play it like a semi-Slav triangle structure, uber solid. Yesipenko plays this move, and Magnus here plays a move that in a position that has been reached tens of thousands of times has been played like 20 times. Now, granted, it has been played by some very good players. The idea of bishop c3, I cannot fully explain to you, if I'm being honest. I think it's just the unique way of dealing with the fact that your bishop has been forced to go to d2. Like, here, if white plays knight c3, that's one way to play the position, but bishop c3 enables knight d2, maybe queen c2, maybe e4, maybe as the center opens up, your bishop comes alive. And here b6 generally is the way black treats this position, or c6. So when Yesipenko played c5, an absolute novelty, this move has never been played before, I'm sure Magnus was like, WTF. Considering the fact that that quite literally justifies the bishop being there, right? So clearly Yesipenko came prepared. Maybe he wanted knight takes and knight to e4, just going for this bishop. Magnus ended up playing knight d2 anyway, and then this move knight to e5, looking for knight c6. If this trade were to occur, the pressure on d5 would be overwhelming. In many cases, white could even transform the position at some moment and just target this pawn. So black goes bishop b7, and we have a big trade. We have one trade, a second trade, and a third trade. Now, what does this transformation of position mean for white? Well, white is playing against what's known as a hanging pawn structure, D and C versus E and B. This is a hanging pawn structure. Normally, this pawn is back on c6, though, and the pawns don't move up together. And what you need to do is you really need to control them from coming forward, which is what Magnus does. Black brings a rook, Magnus brings a rook, and here Yesipenko plays a5, which is a fantastic move because number one, you're looking to gain more space to prevent anything from going to b3. Number two, the bishop will go behind the pawn and have this long-range diagonal. At some point, rook c8 will come. Like, all of black's position makes sense. So Magnus decides to take on f6, which is, again, a massive decision to take on f6, because now, of course, you allow this, and I suppose your justification is that you will take on c5, which does happen later. First, the queens meet over here, and here Yesipenko, rather than trading, plays the move queen b4, hoping that Magnus will take so that he will open up his rook. Now that looks great. The problem is that white is just in time to take on c5, and then the players decided to repeat moves. Did Yesipenko have to do this after rook b5, bishop c6, like in this position? Maybe not. For example, he can go rook takes a2, rook c6, and win this knight. That is definitely one way to play the position. But that might result in an endgame of knight bishop versus rook, which it's not so clear that this is so good for black. And if you back up a few moves, like, you know, where rook c1 was played, Yesipenko could have gone without the queens meeting here. He could have maybe played a move like c4 to wedge the pawns, and it would have been a complex game. It would have been a bishop pair and a pawn structure imbalance. But Andrei loses his lifetime 100% score versus Magnus, and of course it is just a draw. And again, it's not the world's most exciting game, but it is noteworthy that that was not a problem for him. Just drawing Magnus very effortlessly with the black pieces. Some surprise in the opening. I don't know if he invented c5 over the board back here. This move c5, but hey, tomorrow Andrei's got the white pieces, and last time he played Magnus and Tata Steel, he did win, so let's see what happens. I've got some other games to show you. The second game that I wanted to show you all is actually not this game, it is this game between Amin Tabatabai and Hayek Martirosyan. This is a really unfortunate matchup. Why? Because Amin is a young talent from Iran, and Hayek is a young talent from Armenia. And it's one of these situations where you don't want either of them to lose. It's like a shame they have to play each other. But let's see what happens. So we have a Nimso Indian with bishop to b4, e3. This is a classical line, but bishop d2 is most certainly not classical. Knight f3 or knight e2 here is significantly more common. And black responds with c5, and this is exactly white's point. That's why you play bishop to d2. Now, knight e4 is a very direct solution. You just want to take the bishop. You do not want your opponent at any moment to have the bishop pair. So you wait a little bit, and then finally, when your opponent threatens to get out of the way... Oh, well, actually, b5 is a good move also. Then he took. b5, actually, you cannot go to b2 because of this. So he waited one more move, and then he finally took. We have a big transformation of position, and a really wild game. So first of all, that rook is not hanging because you would lose the knight, then you would lose the rook and probably get mated. That's probably not good. So the queen comes back, black develops, white plays bishop e2, black plays rook b8 to take control of the file, and now white castle. So what is going on? We actually have pretty interesting imbalance. That pawn on d7 is awful. Like it is a sitting duck. But knight e5 counterattacks on c4. So if you just lazily play a move like f4, you're like, well, I'm going to win this. You know, I'm going to go over here. Takes, and you're never going to get this because I'll get that. So that's no good. So rook c1, rook b3, and now you can try to play f4 because if knight takes c4, then takes. You have a cool little trick here, knight e4, which is a very funny move. You attack the bishop, you attack the queen. And if the queen takes, you come back and now you fork. So you have two attacks on the bishop with the knight and the rook. Very funny trick, the way geometry works there. Because black moved in the rook. So knight c6 and king f2. Look at that. Just in a middle game, like knight, queen, bishop, two rooks, king f2 is the best move. Why? I don't fully know. It is the best move though. I think it's because you guard the pawns and the bishop, maybe, and your queen can go away, and this is the only way to do it, and your king's completely safe because all the pieces are over here. I don't know. I just make the recap. I don't actually know. Rook a2. Rook takes a3. And you're like, wait a minute. Yeah, Levy, that's been hanging for a while. Yes, I know. Yes, that has been hanging for a while. But again, the problem is that even though black is a pawn up, all of black's pieces are over here. They're not doing anything. So white could go on an attack with the h-pawn or the bishop or the rook somehow, right? So d6, rook c3 attacks the queen. That's not complex. All right, now we're going to get a repetition of moves. Oh, well, rook c1 here is a draw. So take a look. And like if rook c1 had been played, Martirosyan would have went here, and then it would have been up to Tabatabai to play this move. But he didn't. He actually offers a trade of queens despite being down a pawn. Why? Well, again, these pieces don't really scare anybody. I'm assuming that Tabatabai was like, I'm going to win my pawn back. This is not going to be particularly challenging. But somehow Martirosyan just put all his pieces on normal-looking squares, and even though you can play a lot of logical moves like rook b6, after takes, bishop takes, and knight b4, how are you winning anything? And this rook is stuck. And if you play rook b7 going for this, now I'm in a winning rook endgame. Like, being down 6 pawns to 5 is not a big deal, but if you trade queens, knights, and bishops, yeah, it is a huge deal. Black plays rook a8 and pushes the pawn. Good luck ever stopping me, right? So, more pieces you trade, the worse it is. And that's exactly what happened. So basically, he went down 2 pawns, but still had active counterplay. He's going to win the pawn back on a6, right? He's going to win, there it is. But Black, meanwhile, has coordinated his pieces beautifully and plays this f5 move. This is a square known as an outpost. White also has a knight outpost, but Black has a better outpost, because that outpost, a piece in your opponent's, square in your opponent's position where you can plant your piece and it can't be kicked out. This knight can be kicked out. And when the king starts coming forward, it's like, all right, like, I will kick you out because I'll check you and I'll win your knight. And now the rest of this game is something that people say it's known as technique. How will Haik win this game? He's up a pawn. His opponent has a pretty good bind. He's going to do this. He's going to threaten a trade of knights. That is literally a threat because you would result in an endgame where you're just losing. Okay, knight to b1. Look at this. Look at this. He's forcing Tabatabai to move his knight around to avoid a trade, and now he comes in, defends his weaknesses, and look at that. Knight comes in to defend. This is under pressure. Okay, what's next? Repetition? No, little waiting game. We hit the king. Now, if king here or king here... Well, actually, if king here, knight d2 is probably quite bad. King d3, however... Curious, what king d3? Maybe king e6 and king d5. King e1 was played. And once your rook is dominating a king like this... Right, okay, we get a little bit of shuffling. You pick up a second pawn. You're going to pick up a third pawn. You're going to pick up a fourth pawn. And Tabatabai resigned. He resigned because you can give a check. You can give a check. Doesn't really matter. What's going to end up happening is you're going to lose. You're going to be down 4 pawns, and you're going to lose the game. And Haik Martirosyan, who has now defeated like everybody, including Shahryar Mamedyarov, is winning with the black pieces in game 1 of round 5, whatever round this is. That's huge. That is, I mean, he's got to not lose tomorrow with white. We've seen a few people. We saw Vasif Durarbaili lose a game with the white pieces to Noderbek, although he ended up qualifying. I mean, it's quite rare, but it does happen. It does happen. So we'll have to see what happens tomorrow. Now, next game I'd like to show you. The next 2 games are absolutely insane. So if you had the patience to make it 12 minutes through the recap, it's really not that long. If you can't last 12 minutes, I mean, I don't... Phrasing. E4. This is a quarterfinals matchup between a former world champion, Alexander Kostyuk, and Valentino Gunina from Russia. Both of them from Russia, and both of them play wild chess. So we have a 2 knights Caro-Kann, take, knight f6. This is the modern treatment, looking to get a position that resembles a Tartic hour. But queen e2 is the modern way to play, and knight d7 is not considered the best move, actually. Well, I mean, best move is kind of relative. Like, queen d5 looking for a queen trade is good. Also, there's another way to play. I like to play bishop g4, but then you have to take with the g-pawn, but that's just my preference. I've also played the move bishop e6 here with black to then go knight d7, knight f6. But anyway, this is why this is considered bad. Not bad, but slightly passive for black. It's because you have a mate threat, you lose your queen, you say, oh no, my queen. And basically, you've blocked in black's light squared bishop. So it's considered pretty good. Considered pretty good for white. Bishop to d6, d4, black castles, and white plays queen back to g3, lining up this and bishop to h6. That is just a threat. Bishop h6, there is no knight h5 because this. So black plays knight e4, that forces the queen to move again, and now you either go back to f6 or play the move f5. Black chooses to play the move f5 and give away the c6 pawn with tempo, and white comes back. Now, if this were to happen, takes, and you say, okay, I'm going to take on e5, well, let's not forget b5 is hanging. Now you're just a pawn down. But white has the bishop pair. This is very bad. So black decides to play a5. Now, if you take on b5 here, that would be very bad now for white, because that's the whole point of a5. You team up your rook with your bishop, and this is very bad news. So white has to play f3, attacking the knight. The knight can go back to f6, which is exactly what happens. And black plays bishop a6, trying to justify that entire diagonal. The move b4 is on the cards. White is still a pawn up, but the position is quite chaotic. Plays the move bishop to f4, rook d8, and now when you leave a chess player unattended, namely a grandmaster, what move are they going to play? White can do a lot of things here. Bring the rook, move the queen out of the way over here, make a pawn move. No. h4. Now, according to the computer, this is a very bad move. But, you know, the computer should shut up. It has no idea what it's talking about. The computer thinks that this is a bad move because of the move b4, okay? And, for example, if you were to play queen d2 and takes, in this position there is queen takes e5. With this here, if rook takes d2, bishop a6, rook a6, something like this, and, you know. Now, I'm not sure what Alexandra Kostyuk had planned after this move. Maybe after bishop e5, she had something else on her mind. Like in this position, she might have wanted to do something else. I don't know. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I didn't ask her. But knight h5 was played right away, and the bishop comes back to h2. So the bishop has been attacked, it's been booted, and now, oh, that's, no, that's a misclick. But now g4 is possible, right? So if, now f4, again, I'm not really sure why this move is not getting played. It's a very natural looking move. It's just not getting played. And that allows white to play this. Now, rook e8, knight g4, gets out of the way of the bishop. Maybe ideas to jump in there in the future. a4, so the queen has to move again. Now, again, I'm not really sure why this move's not getting played. Instead, Gunyina focuses on the center of the board. Rook e1, very patient move. Knight g3 blocks everything and makes you take. So you do it. Now, queen f5. How many moves has this queen made? And you've got ideas. Okay, Takes, a3. Now we take, and the rook goes to f8. Like, what is happening in this game? White is 2 pawns up. This can be taken. This can be taken. This can be taken. This can be taken. That can be taken. That can be taken. But black plays rook f8, which allows white to, well, take on b5 one more time. But white decides to play queen e4, either lining this up or a check or taking on e5. Rook a4 pins that pawn to the queen. Now bishop d3, pawn to g6, and queen d5 check. King moves up to g7, rook e4. The whole point of this move is that you'd like to go here and play h5, maybe you want to stabilize, but rook e4 is a big blunder after rook takes d4. Because after rook takes d4, black has the move bishop to c5. And now white is in serious trouble. Because this pawn completely boxes in the king is forced to move, the bishop takes the rook e1, and this is just a losing position for white. Even though white is a pawn up, because of the massive weaknesses on the dark squares, this is completely winning for black. Black plays the move rook to d8. It would have been better to play rook f4, rook h4, and try to get into h1. I'm not really sure what the defensive measure here was for white. It literally could have been something like this. Just hide and pray. Rook e1 is mate, so you got to do something about it. Like that. I mean, I don't know. But Gunyina went this way. King e2, rook h4. I mean, she is still on. She is arriving. And she's got to take 2 pawns for free. Kostyuk is now a pawn down. Rook f3, queen a7. Look at that move. Queen to a7. Yeah, this is like bad. This is very bad news. I mean, queen g1 is about to happen. Look at this. Queen to d5. And queen d5 must have threatened this. This is what I imagine was the idea to protect. But there's a mate here. Here, 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 here. Check. Takes. Check. Here. Check. Here. Check. Here. Mate. Yeah. Mate and 8. Which is pretty hard to calculate. All that. Also, you've got to make sure you're not getting perpetual checked. Gunina missed this opportunity and played king h6 first, which allows Alexandra Kostyniuk to run with king f3. Now if you give her a check, she runs out to g4 and somehow she's safe. So black plays king back to g7, white takes on f4 and just runs away from checks and is completely safe. And now white is actually from a pawn up to a pawn down to a pawn up. Is this a draw? Well, Gunina can give Prepet. She chooses to make a king move. And now white is able to create a battery-threatening mate. And white is able to threaten the trade of queens. And the thing is, this endgame where you're going to potentially win the b5 pawn could be very difficult for black to draw. So now it's Kostyniuk again attacking Gunina. This is protected. And here comes the king hunt. Now white is up 2 pawns. Check, and the king runs forward. Check, and the king is on the run. What is going on? Okay, opposite colored bishop endgame, 3 versus 2. Is this a draw, or is white winning? What is happening here? King is very active. Okay, Is this winning? Is this winning? With the A and C pawns. And folks, it actually turns out it is. Because white just has too many pawns. If black just stays around on this diagonal, what white will do is play a move like bishop e4 and it's zugzwang. For example, bishop to c7, you'll just go bishop g6. And you're just going to win the pawns. And you say, well, why couldn't I have done that in this position, bishop g6? Well, you could have. But then h4. And then maybe, for example, here, if you go like g3, there is, of course, stopping the pawn and pushing your h-pawn. But there's some positions where the bishop on c7 can maybe hold, but yeah. Kostyniuk wins. What a game. I mean, this is one, and if you think that this is bad, like in terms of just total chaos, the next game and final game I'm going to show you was the most insane game. I mean, this game was, yeah. So, Vidit versus Vasif. This one was actually an exchange Slav, and you would not think that in a position of total symmetry we would get pandemonium. Vasif was the first to break symmetry with a6. And Vidit traded knights and created this structure. Then, after a kind of threatening of a repetition potentially, knight g4, we got e5, h3 attacks the knight, f6 is danger levels attacking the bishop, takes. Isn't Vidit just up a pawn and a second pawn is potentially falling? Yeah, but black has the bishop pair. This pawn is under fire. What is this structure? b2 is hanging, b4 is met with a5. If you take on a5, I go here, I go bishop b4, you can't take because the rook hangs. What is this position? So now Vidit plays b5, hoping for takes here. He's not going to get that because Vasif attacks his knight. The knight moves, now he takes b5 because now there's no knight d5. Now queen g5. Vidit's got 5 pawns over here to 2 and a random d pawn, a b and a pawn versus this. His king and rook, no one's developed and no one's developed over there. What? And Vasif plays h6 attacking the queen. According to the computer, h6 is a big blunder because you can go full danger levels. Never go full danger levels. Excuse me. Bishop takes. That disconnects the queen. Check. Now, if the king goes here, you would take. And you would play like here, attacking the king. That's apparently very dangerous for Vasif. But Vidit played queen f4. And that allowed the stability of bishop e6 and now b4. Who's attacking who? Vidit is desperately trying to castle. First he gave a check, but why has a b pawn made it to b2? What is this? And the craziest thing is you can't just go and attack this rook, because that rook can just take your pawn. If you take, then bishop c6 check, king d8, and look at this stunning move. Queen g5. If takes, rook takes h8 is made in 2 because bishop blocks. And if you go here, then after check here, it's mate anyway. Folks, queen g5 check. Are you kidding me? The king would have played the whole game in the middle. What? What is this? So queen goes to c5. Vidit just castled on move 26. Vidit, there are children watching. Why are you castling on move 26? But look at this, king f7, and everything is defended for black. Rook d1, finally here comes bishop a2, b1 queen is about to happen. d7, but the other guy's also got a pass pawn. King goes back to g8 out of danger. You can't take because a new queen would be born. Rook e6. That forces the queen out. Now we have a queen trade. This is still right here. He can't rush with it though, because after takes bishop d5, the game is over. Actually, or maybe rook b1. Rook b1 is also possible, and then bishop d. I don't even know. Rook d8. And now, in this position, actually, rook d8, I think it was a mistake. Vasif had to go here, guarding his pawn and threatening to take it like this. Rook d8, as natural as it looks, is actually a mistake, because after rook takes d4, queen, there is this pin. The bishop went away from a2. And so after this, black is still playing this position for advantage, but white has tricks. Now we have this. Rook and 5 pawns versus rook bishop 2. Totally equal in terms of material. Rook d2, king f1. Bishop here, rook c5. No bishop c4 for you. Rook d1, okay, no. And so the players ended up just getting to a position where white can't make any progress, and neither can black. I mean, white can push pawns, and black can create constant threats against the pawns, and pawns will fall. And that's kind of exactly what ended up happening. A couple of pawns fell, and here the players decided that both of them have had enough of this game and agreed to a draw. Now, you might say, well, white can play this for a win. It's not really. Here's why. Because white will always be forced back, and, you know, rook g2 check is always a possibility. Like, white cannot consistently make progress. Black will just sit and wait. White plays f5, I go here, you'll never make progress. And, yeah, I'm gonna hunt your pawns down. Now, it should be said, a move like rook g3, the trade is still a draw, but it's probably wrong for black. Like, black should keep the rook on the board, because the rook and the bishop together are very strong. But yeah, I mean, what an absolutely nuts... these last 2 games gave me more of a headache than this burglary in our house. Like, I gotta put humor into the situation, but wow. Wild games. The way our standings look, so we've got Carlsen Yesipenko will take on Bakro versus Kacper Piorun, the winner. Grishuk Duda will take on the winner of Vasif versus Vidit. Feraseyev Ivic. Ivic is just unbelievable, and I will feature some of his games. He just had a draw, so hopefully there will be a decisive game. Also, Sam Shankland, who was playing Peter Svidler. Shankland is the last American remaining. So credit to Shankland, who's had an awesome run, knocking out players such as Jumabayev, Areshenko, Jobava. I mean, yeah, he's had quite a good run, so we'll definitely try to feature him as well. On the women's side, we've got Goryachkina Sadvakasova. Goryachkina actually was unable to beat Sadvakasova with the white pieces. Mushchuk versus Zadnidze. Alexandra Kostyuk, the only lead in the quarterfinals, and Lagno versus Zhongyi Tan, or I don't know if that's Zhongyi Tan. Also all square. Tomorrow, hopefully, we will get some more decisive results. Until then, folks, have a wonderful rest of your Sunday or Monday, depending on when you're watching, and I'll see you for the conclusion of the next round.